The cafe was warm and full of soft chatter that night. People had gathered for a small charity event meant to raise funds for a local children's center. There were candles on the tables, soft lights above, and the scent of coffee and cinnamon in the air. It wasn't a fancy event, just something local people did to help out. A few singers had already performed, some nervous, some confident. There was laughter, light applause, and that friendly buzz of community where everyone seemed to know someone. Near the corner window sat a quiet woman, alone, her fingers resting on a cup of tea, gone cold. She watched everything with gentle eyes, smiling politely whenever someone glanced her way. No one seemed to know much about her. She wasn't a regular at the cafe, and she didn't speak much. Some had seen her around town, always kind but distant, as if her thoughts lived somewhere far away. When the host came up to announce the next act, there was a pause. The pianist who was supposed to accompany the next singer hadn't arrived. A few people whispered, looking around for a solution. The singer, a teenager who had been practicing all week, looked disappointed. The host laughed awkwardly into the microphone, trying to keep things light. "Well, it seems our piano player got stuck in traffic. Is there anyone here who knows how to play?" he joked. The crowd chuckled, thinking it was part of the fun. Then someone from a nearby table pointed toward the quiet woman by the window. "She works at the music shop, doesn't she? Maybe she can play." The host followed their gaze, smiling kindly. "Oh, really? Miss, do you play?" he asked across the room. The woman looked startled, her cheeks turning a little pink. She shook her head quickly, but the host was already walking toward her, microphone in hand. "Come on," he said cheerfully, "just something simple to help our young singer out. It's for a good cause." A few people clapped encouragingly. The teenager looked hopeful. The woman hesitated, her fingers tightening around her teacup. For a long moment she didn't move. Then quietly she stood up. The room gave her a small round of applause as she walked toward the stage. Her steps were slow and careful, like someone stepping into old memories. She sat down on the piano bench. Her hands hovered above the keys but didn't touch them right away. The piano was slightly out of tune, the kind you find in old cafes where music lives more in spirit than in sound. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a moment, and then placed her fingers on the keys. The first few notes came softly, uncertain, like the voice of someone waking after a long silence. The crowd quieted. Even the waiter stopped moving for a second. Something in her touch made people listen without meaning to. It wasn't loud or showy, but it was delicate, full of feeling. The singer looked at her, then began to sing, following the melody. The woman played gently, supporting the voice, letting it rise and fall like waves. But as the song continued, something began to change. The music grew stronger, more confident. Her fingers moved faster, smoother. The melody wasn't just accompaniment anymore, it was alive. Each note seemed to tell a story, as if it carried pieces of her heart with it. The singer stopped singing halfway through. She didn't mean to, she just forgot the words, caught in the emotion of the music. The woman didn't stop playing. The piano took over completely. The melody turned haunting and beautiful, filling the cafe with something no one could quite describe. It felt like joy and sadness mixed together, a story of loss and hope, told without a single word. People stared, transfixed. Some leaned forward unconsciously, as if drawn closer by invisible strings. There was no sound except for the piano. Even the hum of the machines behind the counter seemed to fade away. The music grew deeper, rising and falling like breath, like memory. It wasn't perfect. Some notes wavered slightly. But that only made it more real, more human. A man in the corner wiped his eyes. A woman at a table near the front reached for her friend's hand. They didn't know why they were crying. They just felt something they hadn't felt in a long time. The woman playing had forgotten the crowd by now. Her eyes were closed. Her face was calm, but her expression carried something heavy, something that had waited years to be released. It was as if every part of her life, every hidden ache, was flowing through her fingertips into the piano. The melody shifted between light and shadow like day breaking after a storm. Then just as gently as it began, it slowed. The final note lingered in the air, soft and trembling, before fading into silence. For several seconds, no one moved. The cafe was completely still. The woman lowered her hands, resting them in her lap. Her breathing was slow, controlled, but her shoulders trembled slightly. Then someone began to clap. Another followed. Soon the entire room was on its feet, applauding louder than they had all night. She looked surprised, as if waking from a dream. The host hurried over, eyes wide. "That was incredible," he said softly. She smiled politely, shaking her head. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "I didn't mean to take over. I just played what I remembered." The singer hugged her suddenly, still in awe. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard," she whispered. The woman blushed again and stepped back shyly. "Thank you," she said, almost in a whisper, and started to return to her seat. But before she could, people began asking questions. "Where did you learn to play like that?" someone asked. "Are you a professional musician?" another called. She only smiled and said quietly, "Not anymore." Then she sat down, took her cup of tea, and stared at the steam rising from it as if she saw a different time in it. For the rest of the evening, people kept talking about her performance. The host mentioned it several times, still amazed. The singer finished her song later, but everyone agreed the most unforgettable moment of the night had already happened. It wasn't just the music, it was the way it made everyone feel. It was as if the piano itself had spoken. When the event ended, a few people stopped by her table to thank her again. One older man said, "You reminded me of my wife. She used to play like that before she passed. Tonight I felt like she was here again." The woman smiled gently, her eyes moist. "That means more than you know," she said softly. Outside, the night air was cool and calm. She stepped out of the cafe, holding her coat close around her shoulders. The streets were quiet now, the kind of peaceful stillness that only comes after something meaningful. She walked slowly, her steps echoing faintly on the pavement. She hadn't touched a piano in years, not since the day she promised herself she never would again. But tonight, for reasons she couldn't explain, she had played. And the moment her fingers touched those keys, it felt like something inside her had woken up, something she had buried deep long ago. As she walked home, she could still feel the keys beneath her fingers. The notes echoed in her mind, not perfectly but beautifully, like a heartbeat she had forgotten was hers. She thought of the faces in the crowd, the silence that had filled the room, and the way it felt to finally let go. When she reached her small apartment, she placed her coat on the chair and stood by the window. The city lights shimmered below. In the distance, she could still hear faint laughter from the cafe. She closed her eyes, breathed deeply, and smiled for the first time in a long while. She didn't know what would come next, whether she would ever play again or if this night was just a small crack in a wall she had built years ago. But one thing was certain, something had changed. The sound of her own music had reminded her of who she once was and maybe who she could be again. The next morning, the cafe owner unlocked the doors earlier than usual. The sun was still soft, spilling pale light across the wooden floors. The night before still lingered in his mind. He kept thinking about the quiet woman who had played like a storm and a prayer all in one. He replayed the sound again and again in his head. It had felt magical, something no one had planned for. He switched on the lights, wiped the counter, and checked his phone. There were already messages, people talking about the woman's performance. Someone had recorded a short clip of her playing, and overnight it had started spreading through local social media pages. It wasn't viral yet, but people were sharing it, saying things like, "Listen to this," and "You have to hear this mystery pianist." By noon, everyone in town seemed to be talking about it. The video had poor lighting and crackly sound, but the emotion was unmistakable. You could feel every note, every heartbeat through that small clip. People were curious. Who was she? Where did she come from? Why hadn't anyone ever heard her before? Meanwhile, the woman herself went about her morning quietly. She lived in a small apartment above a bookstore. The piano she once owned had been sold years ago. Her days were simple now. Work at the small music store, come home, make tea, read, and sleep. She didn't use social media. She didn't watch the news. She had no idea that her music had already started to travel beyond that cafe. At work, she noticed people glancing at her more than usual. One of her coworkers smiled and said, "Hey, you didn't tell us you could play like that." She looked up, puzzled. "Play like what?" He laughed. "The video. Everyone's talking about it. You were amazing last night," her face flushed. "Someone recorded that?" "Of course," and he said, showing her the clip on his phone. She watched for a moment. The shaky recording, the sound of the piano, the silence before the applause. It felt strange seeing herself there. Her hands looked smaller on screen, almost fragile. She smiled faintly but said nothing. The memory of last night was still alive in her chest. The feel of the keys, the stillness of the crowd, the release she had felt. For years she had kept that part of herself locked away, buried under layers of guilt and time. But now, people were looking at her differently, as if they had discovered something she had tried to forget. That afternoon, a woman came into the shop holding her phone. "Excuse me," she said kindly. "Are you the one from the cafe?" The quiet pianist nodded slowly. "I just wanted to thank you," the woman said. "My daughter was in the audience last night. She's been learning piano, but she wanted to quit. When she heard you play, she said it made her want to keep going. She said your music felt like someone was talking to her heart." The woman behind the counter blinked, unsure what to say. "That's very kind," she finally replied. "Please tell your daughter I'm happy she didn't give up." The customer smiled and left, leaving the pianist standing there, her heart full of mixed emotions. Warmth, sadness, disbelief. Later that evening, when she walked home, she noticed small groups of people whispering, some pointing. She heard bits of conversation. "That's her," and "the woman from the video." It made her uncomfortable. She wasn't used to attention. For so long, she had lived in quiet spaces, content to be unseen. When she got home, she sat by the window again. The same piano notes played in her mind like a soft echo. She thought about what it meant, why she had agreed to play that night after so many years. It wasn't planned. Something inside her had simply said yes, almost as if the piano had called her back. The following weekend, the cafe hosted another small event. The host spotted her walking by outside and quickly invited her in. "You have to play again," he said eagerly. She smiled nervously. "Oh no, that was just a one-time thing." "Please," he said. "People have been asking about you. They want to hear you again." She hesitated, then shook her head gently. "I'm sorry. I don't think I can." There was disappointment in his eyes, but he didn't push further. "If you ever change your mind, our piano's always waiting," he said kindly. She thanked him and walked away, her thoughts tangled. She didn't want to perform. She didn't want eyes watching her, waiting for her to play. Music had once been her whole world, until it had taken everything from her. That night, sleep didn't come easily. She kept remembering her brother, his laughter, the way he used to sit beside the piano, swinging his legs while she practiced. He would clap after every piece, even when she made mistakes. It had been their shared joy, and then one day it all ended. The memory tightened in her chest like a knot. She got up, opened the window, and let the cool air touch her face. In the silence, she could almost hear the sound of the piano keys again, that same melody that had spilled out of her the other night. Only this time it carried something softer, almost forgiving. The next morning, she found a letter slipped under her door. It was from the cafe owner. Inside was a simple note. "Your music reminded us all that beauty still exists in quiet places. Thank you for that. We're hosting another charity event soon, this time for the hospital. If you ever wish to play again, the piano is waiting, no pressure at all." She folded the note carefully and placed it on her table. She didn't know what to do with it. Part of her wanted to ignore it, but another part, a small, stubborn spark deep inside, couldn't stop thinking about it. A few days later, on her way home from work, she stopped by the park. There was an old upright piano there, painted with bright colors by local artists. Anyone could play it. Children banged on the keys sometimes, laughing. Old men sat nearby, feeding birds. She stood there for a long time, watching. Then when the crowd had thinned, she sat down. Her fingers hovered above the keys. She pressed one, then another. The sound was rough, but it still felt familiar, like greeting an old friend who never stopped waiting. At first, she played softly, barely more than a whisper. But as the minutes passed, she began to lose herself in it again. People walking by slowed down, listening. A little boy stopped his scooter and stared. His mother smiled and whispered, "That's beautiful." She played until the sun dipped low, until her heart felt lighter. When she finally stood up to leave, the little boy clapped. "Play again someday?" he called. She smiled and nodded. "Maybe I will." That night, when she reached home, she realized her hands smelled faintly of old wood and metal, the scent of piano keys. She hadn't felt that in years. It made her chest ache in a way that wasn't painful anymore, just nostalgic. Days turned into weeks, but the whispers about her never really stopped. The video continued to spread online. It reached music teachers, small radio stations, even a local newspaper that printed a short story about the secret pianist who made a cafe cry. One afternoon, her boss at the music shop called her to the back room. "You've got a visitor," he said. A man was waiting there, that older, kind-eyed, carrying a small recorder. He introduced himself as a journalist. "I'm writing about the people who keep art alive in small towns," he explained. "Would you mind if I asked you a few questions about that night?" She hesitated, but finally agreed. He didn't ask anything intrusive, just gentle questions. What inspired her? How long she'd been playing, what music meant to her. When she finished speaking, he said quietly, "Your story will touch people. Sometimes it's not about fame or perfection. It's about truth, and you have that." She smiled shyly. "I don't think I'm ready for people to know everything." He nodded. "That's fine. I'll just call you the secret pianist." That's enough. When the article came out, it wasn't sensational. It was heartfelt. People shared it, and many wrote comments saying her story gave them hope. Some said they had started playing music again after years of silence. Others said her courage reminded them to face their own fears. That night, sitting by the window once more, she read a few of those messages on her phone. Her eyes welled up. She had never thought her quiet act of saying yes in a moment of hesitation could ripple so far. She looked out at the city lights and whispered softly, "Maybe it's time to stop hiding." In that moment, something shifted in her heart, a quiet acceptance, like the soft sound of a piano key pressed in the dark. Days passed quietly, but life around her had started to change in small, unexpected ways. The townspeople smiled when they saw her now. The bakery owner always waved when she walked by. Strangers greeted her softly, their voices warm with respect. She wasn't famous, not really, but she had become something else. A quiet inspiration, a reminder that beauty can come from silence. At first, she tried to go on as before. She still opened the music shop every morning, arranged instruments, dusted the shelves, and tuned guitars. But sometimes when the shop was empty, she found herself sitting at the old keyboard in the corner. It was out of tune, but she didn't care. She'd play softly, letting the notes fill the still air, her heart steadying with every touch of the keys. One afternoon, a young boy came into the shop with his mother. He looked no older than 10. He walked straight to her and said, "Are you the lady from the video?" She smiled gently. "I suppose I am. My teacher showed it to our class," he said proudly. "She said you play with feeling. I'm learning piano too, but I get nervous when people watch me." She leaned closer. "Can I tell you a secret?" she asked softly. He nodded eagerly. "I get nervous too," she said with a smile. "Even grown-ups do. But when you play, pretend it's just you and the music. That's all that matters." The boy grinned, his eyes bright. "Okay, I'll try." When he left, she felt something warm inside her, the kind of warmth she hadn't felt since long ago, when her younger brother used to sit by her piano, clapping after every song she played. That memory came rushing back so clearly that she had to sit down. She could almost hear his laugh, that bright echoing sound that used to fill the house. But then the rest of it followed. The memory of the day everything changed. It had been years ago, a time she rarely allowed herself to remember. She was preparing for her first major performance, a local concert where scouts from a conservatory would be present. She had practiced for months, pushing herself to perfection. Her younger brother had been so proud, always cheering for her, telling everyone that his sister would be famous one day. That night, as she rehearsed one final time before the show, he had been sitting nearby, pretending to conduct the music with a pencil in his hand. She had laughed at him, telling him to be careful. But kids don't listen. A moment later, there was a crash, the sound of glass shattering. He had fallen near the window trying to reach for something, and in one terrifying second, her life changed forever. Even now, years later, she couldn't think of it without feeling the same sharp pain in her chest. The guilt never left her. Every time she looked at a piano, she saw his face. That was the day she promised herself she would never play again. But life, it seemed, had other plans. That evening, when she returned home, she found another letter slipped under her door. It was from the cafe again. This time, it wasn't just an invitation. It included a small note. "We're holding a special concert to honor families who've experienced loss. We thought of you. Your music carries healing, the kind we need." She stared at the note for a long time, her heart caught between fear and longing. Playing in front of people again, especially at such an event, felt impossible. Yet deep down a small voice whispered that maybe this was what she needed too. For days she couldn't stop thinking about it. She would walk through the park after work, passing by the painted public piano. Sometimes she'd stop just to touch the keys, but she never played. One afternoon, an elderly woman who often sat nearby feeding pigeons said, "Child, you should play. I can see it in your eyes and the music wants to come out." The pianist smiled shyly. "I'm not sure I can anymore." The old woman nodded knowingly. Sometimes the only way to heal is to do the very thing that scares us. That night she couldn't sleep. The words replayed in her mind. She got up, sat by the window, and looked out at the city lights. For years she had run from her music. She had convinced herself it was the source of her pain, but maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was the bridge between her and what she lost. The next morning she made her decision. She would play again, not for applause, not for attention, but for her brother and for herself. When she arrived at the cafe to tell the owner, he was overjoyed. "You just made a lot of people very happy," he said warmly. The concert was scheduled for the end of the month. It wasn't large, just a local event to bring comfort and remembrance. Still, she felt her nerves rise as the day drew closer. She spent her evenings practicing at the music shop after closing time. The owner didn't mind. "As long as you don't break the keyboard," he joked once. She smiled, but her heart beat fast every time she sat down to play. The first few days were rough. Her fingers were stiff, the timing off. But slowly, like a bird learning to fly again, she found her rhythm. The keys began to feel natural, the melodies flowing smoother each day. Sometimes she'd pause and whisper to the empty room. "You'd laugh if you saw me like this," speaking to her brother as if he were still there. "I'm still terrible at fast pieces." One evening, while she practiced a soft tune, a gentle sound interrupted her, clapping. She turned around to see the same young boy from before standing at the door with his mother. "You sound even better than the video," he said proudly. She chuckled. "Thank you. Shouldn't you be home?" "I told my mom I wanted to listen," he said. His mother smiled apologetically but didn't stop him. "All right," the pianist said softly, "but only for a few minutes." She played again, something gentle and full of hope. When she finished, the boy whispered, "That song felt happy." "Yes," she said, smiling. "It's supposed to." When they left, she sat there for a long while, thinking about how music had the power to reach people, even small hearts still learning how to understand the world. Maybe this was why she had been given a second chance. Finally, the day of the concert arrived. The cafe was decorated with candles and framed photos, brought by families in remembrance of their loved ones. The atmosphere was peaceful, filled with both sadness and warmth. Backstage, her hands trembled slightly. She looked at the piano waiting under the lights. It seemed to call her name. The cafe owner came up to her and said quietly, "No matter what happens tonight, thank you for saying yes." When it was her turn, she walked onto the stage. The crowd applauded softly, respectful and kind. She took a deep breath and sat down. For a moment she stared at the keys, her reflection faintly visible on the glossy surface. Then she closed her eyes and began to play. The first notes came out shaky, but then something shifted. She felt the same deep pull she had felt that first night, the music taking over, guiding her hands. This time, though, there was no fear. Each note carried a memory, a message, a whisper of love. She played for her brother, for the years she had spent hiding, for every person who had lost someone and still found the courage to keep going. The song rose and fell like waves on the shore, soft and strong all at once. By the time she finished, the room was quiet again, that same silence she remembered from before, the kind that doesn't need words. Then came the applause, not loud or wild, but full of gratitude. She stood, bowed her head slightly, and smiled through her tears. It wasn't just music anymore. It was a piece of her heart that had finally found peace. After the performance, people came to thank her. Some hugged her, some just smiled with glistening eyes. An old man said, "Your music made me feel my wife beside me again." A mother said, "I lost my son last year. Your song helped me breathe." She listened to them all, humbled and touched. She didn't know what to say except, "Thank you for listening." That night, when she went home, the moon was bright and calm. She sat by her window again, but this time she wasn't alone in her thoughts. She felt her brother's presence, soft and loving, like a gentle melody playing in the distance. She whispered quietly. "I played for you tonight." And somewhere deep inside, she felt the warmth of an answer, not in words but in peace. After the concert, her life began to change in quiet but meaningful ways. People from different towns started visiting the cafe just to hear about the mysterious pianist who played from the heart. The video of her new performance began to spread online, just like the first one, only this time it reached far beyond her small town. Messages began pouring in. Some came from strangers, others from people who had seen her play in person. Many wrote that her music made them feel less alone. They spoke about loss, about love, about finding light again after years of darkness. Reading those words made her heart ache, but in a good way. She realized that what she had carried in silence for so long was something that others carried too. The same kind of pain, the same kind of hope. The cafe owner told her one evening, "You've started something you might not even see. People are coming here just to feel what you made them feel that night." She smiled shyly. "I only played what was inside me. And that's exactly why it matters," he said gently. From that moment, things began to move faster. Invitations came in from nearby cities, small concert halls, charity events, community gatherings. Some wanted her to perform, others wanted her to share her story. At first, she said no to everything. The thought of standing in front of large crowds made her nervous. But after a while, she began to see it differently. Maybe her story wasn't just about her anymore. Maybe it was meant to help others heal too. So she agreed to a few small events. The first was at a school. When she arrived, the hall was filled with children, their eyes full of curiosity. She told them she wasn't a famous musician, just someone who loved the piano. Then she played a gentle tune, something simple and bright. The children listened quietly, and when she finished, they clapped with pure excitement. A teacher asked, "What made you start playing again?" She paused for a moment, thinking. "Sometimes," she said softly, "life takes away the things we love most. But if those things come back to us, even after many years, it's a sign that we're ready to begin again." Her words stayed with the students. One little girl came up afterward and said, "I think my grandpa would have liked your song. He used to play the harmonica." The pianist smiled warmly. "Then maybe you can play something one day that reminds you of him." Moments like these began to fill her days. Each time she played, she felt lighter. Each time she spoke to someone touched by her story, she felt her heart heal a little more. Music had once been her pain, but now it was her bridge, connecting her to others, to her brother's memory, and to herself. Still, fame never interested her. She didn't care about attention or applause. She only cared about truth. When people tried to call her the town's hero, she would blush and change the subject. She never saw herself that way. To her, she was still just the woman who once walked into a cafe and said yes to a piano that had been waiting for her. Months passed, and her name began appearing in small newspapers. "The secret pianist who touched the world," one headline read. The photo was simple. Her sitting at a piano, eyes closed, lost in the music. She didn't even know who took it, but she didn't mind. It felt honest. One evening, she was invited to perform at a hospital event. The staff wanted to bring some peace to the patients and families there. She hesitated at first, worried she wouldn't know what to say or play, but something about the idea felt right. When she arrived, the hall was quiet. Some of the audience sat in wheelchairs. Some were holding loved ones' hands, and others simply watched with tired but hopeful eyes. She didn't introduce herself. She just sat down at the piano and began to play. Her fingers moved gently, the melody calm and comforting. It wasn't a sad song, but it wasn't loud or cheerful either. It felt like a whisper, soft, patient, full of understanding. People began closing their eyes, letting the sound wash over them. Some smiled through their tears. Halfway through the song, she noticed a little boy sitting in the front row beside his mother. He was frail and pale, holding a small toy car in his hands, but when she played, he smiled. The kind of pure, bright smile that could light up a whole room. After the performance, the boy's mother approached her. "He hasn't smiled like that in months," she said softly. "Thank you." The pianist felt her throat tighten. She knelt beside the boy and said, "You have a beautiful smile. Don't ever lose it." He looked up and said, "Your music makes my heart feel better." That night when she went home, she cried for the first time in a long time. Not out of sadness, but because she finally understood something. Her music wasn't about her past anymore. It was about everyone who needed hope, everyone who carried pain silently like she once did. Weeks later, she received a letter from the hospital. It included drawings made by children who had heard her play, small, colorful pictures of pianos, hearts, and smiling faces. One drawing showed her sitting at the piano, and above it a child had written, "The lady who makes people happy." She taped that drawing to her wall. Every morning when she saw it, she smiled. Life didn't become easier, but it became gentler. She still had moments of grief, days when she missed her brother so much it hurt. But now, instead of running from those feelings, she let them live inside her music. Each note she played became a part of her healing. The cafe continued to host small concerts, and she often returned there, not always to perform, but to listen. She loved watching other people share their talents, singers, violinists, even children learning to play their first chords. She always sat quietly at the back, smiling whenever someone looked nervous. She knew that feeling all too well. Sometimes people recognized her and came over to talk. They always asked the same question: "How did you find the courage to play again?" And she always gave the same answer: courage doesn't always shout. Sometimes it's just the whisper that says, "Try one more time." Her story began to reach further than she ever imagined. A small radio station invited her to speak. She was nervous, but she agreed. The host asked her what she thought her music meant to people. She thought for a moment and said, "I think it reminds people that pain can become something beautiful if you let it. You just have to give it time." The host smiled and said, "That's something the world needs to hear more often." That interview was shared widely, and people began writing letters again, not just from her town but from other countries. Some were from musicians who had stopped playing because of loss or fear. Others were from ordinary people who just needed comfort. She wrote back to as many as she could, always with the same message: don't stop creating, even when it hurts. That's when it matters most. One afternoon, she received a call from an organization that supported music therapy programs. They asked if she would consider joining them to play for children and families in recovery centers. She hesitated, unsure if she was ready for something that big. But after thinking for a while, she said yes. Her first event with them took place in a large hall filled with families. There were children in wheelchairs, parents holding hands, and soft chatter in the air. As she played, she felt the same peace she had felt that first night in the cafe. The music flowed through her, gentle and pure. When she finished, one of the coordinators said, "You don't just play notes, you play feelings." She smiled quietly. That's all I ever wanted. Afterward, she stood by the window looking at the sky turning pink and orange with the setting sun. She thought about how her life had unfolded, the years of silence, the night she said yes, the people she'd met, the stories she'd heard. She whispered softly to herself, "It all began because I stayed." That thought stayed with her as she walked home. The world felt different now, not because it had changed, but because she had. She wasn't the woman hiding in the corner of a cafe anymore. She was someone who had learned to face the silence, to turn grief into grace. And as she closed her door that night, she smiled, knowing deep down that this journey wasn't over yet. Something even greater was waiting ahead. Something that would turn her quiet courage into a masterpiece the world would never forget. The day of the memorial concert arrived quietly. The cafe had been transformed into a small hall for the event, with chairs arranged carefully and candles flickering softly along the walls. Families who had suffered loss were invited, and the atmosphere was full of gentle anticipation. It wasn't a celebration in the usual sense. It was a place to remember, to honor, and to feel together. She arrived early, carrying only her sheet music and the calm she had learned to hold inside herself. Her hands trembled slightly, but not with fear, with a mixture of excitement and a deep sense of purpose. She had performed many times now, but tonight felt different. Tonight was about more than notes and applause. Tonight was about healing, for herself and for everyone present. The cafe owner saw her and nodded. "Whenever you're ready," he said softly. She smiled faintly and walked toward the piano at the center of the room. The audience was quiet, respectful, almost reverent. Some faces were familiar from the hospital events, the school concerts, and the cafe gatherings. Others were new, people she would never meet outside these walls, but their eyes held the same quiet longing, the same hope that had brought them here. She took a deep breath and sat on the piano bench. Her hands hovered over the keys, the wood cool beneath her fingers. For a moment, she thought about her brother, about the years she had spent hiding from music, about the nights when she felt grief so sharply that it could have swallowed her whole. And then she let it go, just for a moment, and let the music flow. The first notes were soft, almost like a whisper. The audience leaned forward, listening. The melody grew slowly, deliberate and gentle, like someone stepping carefully into a room after a long absence. It wasn't fast or flashy. It didn't need to be. Every note carried meaning. Every pause carried breath. As she continued, the music swelled, rising and falling like the tide. It spoke of sadness, yes, but also of love, of memory, of courage. It was a piece she had composed herself, built from fragments of old melodies she had written for her brother, and new patterns she had discovered through her journey back to music. She called it For the Ones We Carry. People closed their eyes, letting the sound fill them. Some gripped the hands of loved ones. Some wept quietly, and others smiled through their tears. She played not just with her fingers, but with every memory and every emotion she had carried for years. Halfway through the performance, a small boy in the front row tugged gently at his mother's sleeve. She was sick, but she clapped along to the soft rhythm, her eyes shining. Across the room, an elderly woman leaned back in her chair, her face serene, remembering a son long gone. Each person connected in some small way to the music, and each felt a little lighter because of it. The pianist felt a presence beside her, though the bench was empty. She imagined her brother's small smile, the way he had once clapped for every song she played. She allowed herself to feel it, that soft, unspoken approval she had thought she would never hear again. The melody grew stronger, more confident, more alive. It moved through minor chords and major chords, sadness and hope entwined. She felt tears slide down her cheeks, but she did not stop. She played for those who could not, for those who had lost too much, for those who needed someone to remind them that beauty still existed in the world. When she finally reached the last notes, she let them linger. The sound softened, fading gently into the quiet room. There was a long silence, not uncomfortable, but full of meaning. Then came applause, slow at first, then swelling into standing ovations. The pianist lowered her hands, smiling softly, overwhelmed by the love and gratitude in the room. Afterward, people came to speak with her. Some hugged her, some simply held her hands and thanked her with tears in their eyes. She listened to their stories, small snapshots of grief and hope. One woman said, "I lost my daughter last year. Your music made me feel her here with me tonight." Another man whispered, "I didn't think I could cry again. Thank you for letting me." She replied gently, "It's not my music. It's yours too. You carried it here." As the night went on, she realized something remarkable. Her music had become more than personal healing. It had become a lifeline for others. It had connected people she would never meet, people who had never spoken to each other but who felt united in the shared experience of love and loss. Later, she stepped outside into the cool night air. The sky was clear, dotted with stars. She could hear the faint hum of the city around her, the distant laughter of children playing. And for the first time in years, she felt truly at peace. She thought about how far she had come. From the night she had walked into the cafe, unsure if she could even touch the piano, to this night where she had shared her heart openly with strangers. She remembered the years of silence, the guilt, the grief, and realized that every moment had led her here. Her phone buzzed quietly in her pocket. It was a message from the cafe owner. "You were extraordinary tonight. Everyone will remember this. Thank you for trusting yourself." She smiled softly and typed back, "Thank you for letting me." Over the next few weeks, her life continued to evolve. Invitations came from other cities, asking her to perform for memorial events, schools, and community centers. She declined some, accepted others, but never lost the sense of purpose that had grown inside her. She played only when she felt the music truly mattered, and she always played for the people, never for herself.